Okay, I think it's time to get started. Again, welcome to SDSU Crop Hour this morning. For those of you just joining us, thank you for attending. We're going to continue our theme this week on oats, and Dr. Emmanuel Byamukama will be our first speaker. Dr. Byamukama comes to us from getting his PhD in Iowa at Iowa State University. So a very good background there with several postdoc positions as well, studying pathology. And so he started with us in 2013, and it's time for Dr. Byamukama to start his presentation. Take it away, Emmanuel.
Oh, thanks a lot, Anthony. And so today I'll be talking about crown rust management in oats. I hope you can see my screen and I hope you can hear me okay, Anthony. Everything coming through okay? Okay, looks like. This work I'm on crown rust, doing it with my team here. I'll be presenting some of the work that Isneda is doing. So Isneda Mahecha is a graduate student in my program, and Dalitso is the program manager. And then Connie will have also an opportunity to talk about viruses in oats. So to start, crown rust is really the main disease of oats. So likely we don't see a lot of diseases in oats, but crown rust is the major disease of concern in oats. So this field was in Lincoln County last year, and you can see how it's really hammered by crown rust. I mean, every plant in this field is covered with the rust. If you walk through and come out, you know, all your shoes are covered with spores of this rust. So it's the major disease. It's a very serious disease. It will cause yield loss, as I will show, and even cause the plants to lodge, so affecting forage and straw as well. So I have here a series of pictures again to show you how bad this disease can be. So I'm pretty sure that in this picture here, you can pick plots that didn't have a fungicide. So pretty obvious, and you can also see some of the treated plots that are looking pretty good as a result of a fungicide. So yeah, crown rust is really a very severe disease, especially when it comes in early, and I'll show you more pictures and data to show that. So I have here a series of pictures to show you again the progress of the disease. You can see here, so here on the left, we have a resistant variety, and then here we have a susceptible variety on the right. And you can just see how bad, you know, the disease is on the susceptible variety. And this is just with no fungicide. And so within a span of 2 weeks, that's how the disease progressed. And again, the resistant one is still remaining pretty disease-free, but you can see how severe the disease is looking. And then again, about another week and a half, this is what we see going on in the susceptible variety. The height can also be reduced by this disease, so we have some stunting due to crown rust. But again, here we're looking at a resistant variety looking pretty good. And then, believe it or not, this was a plot of oats, but because of crown rust, you know, everything died and then lodged, and then the weeds took over. So by the time you come to harvest, I mean, there's nothing to harvest here. I mean, the combine cannot pick anything. So in years where we have really bad crown rust, I mean, you can have 100% yield loss caused by this disease, especially, you know, where you can't combine when everything has lodged. So crown rust is a fungal disease. It's caused by this pathogen called Puccinia excuse me. The name of the pathogen is Puccinia former species avini. Excuse me, there I just lost my pronunciation of the pathogen. And it has 4 seasons that it goes through to complete its life cycle. And I'll have later a simplified version of this life cycle. But we start with the pterospores. So this would be the overwintering structure of the pathogen. And the pterospores in the spring, once they absorb moisture and it's warming, these structures will expand and shoot out spores. And these spores must land on an alternative host. And in this case, we have the backthorns. The backthorns are the alternative host for this rust. So any rust pathogen out there needs an alternative host in order to complete its life cycle. So from the buckthorns, then we have another set of spores that are called the astrospores. And the astrospores are the ones that will infect our oats or other grass species. So there is another set of cycles called the um, vegetative cycles of this pathogen. So when you have the astrospores landing on oats and causing the initial disease, the secondary spores are called iridineospores, and these can go on many cycles within the season. And actually, this is what will cause the spreading of the disease within the crop. So I have here a simplified version of that life cycle. So again, we'll start with the pterospores, which would be the resting spores of this pathogen at the end of the season. You can see that these pastures have now turned black. Actually, that's because of the overwintering. The pathogen is preparing to overwinter after the infection process. And so during spring, again, these pterospores will form basidiospores, and those are the ones that infect our alternative hosts, the backthorns. So the backthorns then produce these astrospores, another form of spores that are blown by wind, and those are the ones that will initiate the primary infection in oats. And then from there, we have the secondary spores that are produced by this fungus. And so those are called iridineospores. And those ones can repeat many times within the season and cause secondary infection within the crop in the same season. So that's how we have the disease developing. Again, as any other rust pathogen, it will require another host for it to complete its life cycle. And in South Dakota, we do have a lot of buckthorns, and I will mention that this is a risk factor for this disease. And so we have plenty of inoculum coming from these alternative hosts. Now, for other rusts, like stem rust or leaf rust or stripe rust in wheat, we do not have alternative hosts excuse me, for these rusts to survive in our environment. And so that's why every season we depend on spores coming from the south, blown northwards to be a problem on wheat. And so that's why for some of the pathogens, like leaf rust or stem rust, we see them much later in the season because spores have to come from the south. For stripe rust, because it prefers cooler conditions, we tend to see it a little earlier, but also spores would be coming from the south. However, for crown rust, because we have the alternative host in our environment, we do have plenty of this rust in our environment, and it does survive in our environment. So as I mentioned, the risk factors include buckthorns. We do see a lot of buckthorns in the eastern part of the state. These are, shrubs that near shelter belts, and I see them all over the place. But as you go west, I don't see these buckthorns a lot. So maybe that may explain why we see a lot of disease pressure of crown rust on oats on the eastern river or eastern part of the state compared to the west, partly because we don't have a lot of buckthorns going that direction. So I have a picture here of how this disease develops on buckthorns. You can imagine, this is early spring, and the buckthorns have barely put on any leaves, and they're already getting infected with crown rust. And so these little orange pustules you're seeing, that would be crown rust starting to develop. So again, because we have buckthorns abundant in our environment, and that's why we see a lot of this inoculum coming from the buckthorns. I have here a close-up picture. So one day somebody asked me why the disease is called crown rust, and it's because, as you can see, these uh, uh, issue spores that are coming from backthorns, they come from these structures that look like a crown. And so that's where the name of disease comes from. But again, the backthorns are going to be the source of primary inoculum that will infect our oats. And the other risk factor is, of course, going to be weather. So weather, of course, plays a big role. Where we have wet, frequent rains in the spring, that will encourage, that initial development of the disease on the backthorns first, again, which will produce the inoculum for our oats. And then, of course, the susceptible variety plays a big role. If, as you saw in the initial pictures I showed, if we have a resistant variety, we may not see as much disease, even when the inoculum is abundant. Okay, so when we come to management, there are really two ways we can control this disease. Either we are using a resistant variety or we're applying a fungicide. So I will not spend a lot of time. In fact, I won't mention anything on variety selection because the next talk, Dr. Kleinjan will cover that pretty well. I'll spend some time now talking about fungicides, the timing of the fungicide, and whether we see benefits on the quality of the grain when we apply a fungicide. All right, so the important point to make about fungicide is going to be timing. When are you going to apply that fungicide? If you come in late, when it is too late, for the disease, when the disease has already covered the plant, you're not going to get the benefit. So in this case here, I'm showing a picture of oats that are getting crown rust. You can see here on these lower leaves, very early on in the season. I mean, hardly has this a crop reached jointing, but we're seeing crown rust come through. So what I should have mentioned is that our recommendation for applying a fungicide is at flag leaf. However, where the disease is coming in early, you should do scouting. Of course, you should always be scouting throughout the season. And as soon as you see the disease developing in the mid canopy, apply a fungicide so that the crown rust will not overwhelm the crop. And I have some pictures and data to share with you for that to make that point clear. So in this case, where the crown rust is coming in early in the season, hardly has this crop jointed, but we're seeing a lot of crown rust. If you wait in this case until flag leaf, which is like the standard timing of controlling crown rust, then you will have a lot of disease that will have developed that by that time, the fungicide will not be as effective. It won't provide enough protection because crown rust will have overwhelmed the crop. So in this case, then you need to come in slightly before full flag leaf emergence. So this is what I'm saying that, so this was around the time of in the same picture several weeks after that I showed, you're seeing the disease reach this level in the mid canopy. So by this time, you're really having too much disease that if you apply a fungicide, it won't be as effective. So scouting and timing that fungicide when the disease has not overwhelmed the crop, if in case it comes in early before flag leaf emergence, then you need to apply that fungicide a little early on. So then next I will share again some data to make the point clear about the fungicide timing to manage crown rusts. This study was actually sponsored by General Mills. Their main objective was to look at the fungicide timing and the effect on the quality of the grain. And so here I'm showing 3 varieties that we tested. So Dion is a Minnesota variety that is pretty resistant to crown rust, although you can get some crown rust on this variety a bit later on in the season. But from the start of the season through heading and even after a few days after heading, you don't see a lot of crown rust on Dion. Heading is it's a moderately resistant variety, and then horsepower is very susceptible to crown rust. So when we had these 3 varieties and we applied a fungicide, we used a Stratego at flag leaf. We also looked at after heading, just 2 days after heading, and then we had untreated check. So we look at the disease level, and this year, where for this table here, is when we had very low disease pressure. Actually, low disease pressure. You can see untreated horsepower plots had very low disease, so only 15% on the flag leaf. And you can see the yield response was pretty good, even when we had a low disease pressure. We didn't see a difference in test weights, just because, again, we had that low disease pressure that year. You can see here, Dion, again, very almost no disease developing, and so not a big difference in yield when we have low disease pressure. So the next scenario then is where we had moderate levels of disease. So here we see untreated check on the susceptible variety horsepower, 40%, 41% on the flag leaf. And we can see how the yield did respond very well. So almost tripling the yield in terms of the fungicide that was put at the IPM timing. So IPM timing would be that time when we went in before the flag leaf timing and found enough disease pressure to warrant an early fungicide application. And you can see here the response was pretty good, but not so far away from the flag leaf timing. After heading, of course, is getting quite late. And that's what I was saying, that if you delay too much, then you won't get as good protection. If we contrast that with the susceptible with a resistant variety, again, here we're seeing no statistical difference in yield, just because, the disease is pretty low. The resistance is holding that disease pretty low, that you won't need a fungicide. On the moderate resistant variety, we see a good response, but also not necessarily significant from non-treated, again, just because you have very low disease, because the resistance is holding it off. So now we'll look at a scenario where we had the worst case of crown rust. It came in quite early, and this season we had only one timing at flag leaf of a fungicide, and here we have horsepower, Hayden again, and Dion. And here on the y-axis, we have crown rust severity on the flag leaf. So you can see here on the susceptible variety horsepower, the level of disease on the flag leaf was almost 100%. In fact, in some of the leaves, we found almost 100%. So very high disease pressure, so that even when we put a fungicide, which would be the yellow bars here, the fungicide did not provide a full protection. I mean, you still have 54 or more than half of the flag leaf covered with pustules of the rust. So when the disease is pretty severe, and then you're only coming in at flag leaf timing, if you have a susceptible variety, you won't have good protection. On a moderately resistant variety, you still get good protection, but you're still getting some disease develop. And Dion again is holding off that disease development because it has resistance to crown rust. So again, here the point being that the timing of a fungicide should really be determined from scouting and the pressure of the disease buildup with the time. If it is coming in early, again, as I mentioned, even when the flag leaf has not fully developed, you may need to apply that fungicide to protect the crop. Otherwise, the crop will be overwhelmed and the fungicide won't be as effective. Excuse me. So here's looking at the same year where we had a bad case of crown rust. Now this graph is showing the yield response across the three varieties when a fungicide was applied at flag leaf. You can see here that on a susceptible variety horsepower with a fungicide, only 10 bushels that we got out of that fungicide. So not any good there. You can see the untreated check Hayden is even yielding better than the susceptible horsepower without the fungicide. So again, here making a point that fungicide timing is pretty crucial depending on the disease pressure. So here, Hayden, even with the fungicide, it didn't yield well. It has a potential to yield definitely more than 32 bushels an acre. And here we also see a response to fungicide application, even Dion, and I think John will be talking more about that. But because Dion might accumulate some rust towards later part of the season, when you apply that fungicide at flag leaf, you're going to protect from any yield loss. So that's why we see a response even in a resistant variety in a bad year where we have severe crown rust. All right, so then now let's look at the quality of the grain with the fungicide timing. So again, we're looking at the three varieties here, the resistant variety, Dion, a moderate resistant, Hayden, and then the susceptible variety, horsepower. So the three timings would be the IPM, where we scout and determine if we need a fungicide, then the flag leaf, which is the standard, and then after Hayden. This one was primarily really to look to see if that later fungicide can improve the grain quality. And the main focus was really better glucan. This is a soluble fiber that is one of the reasons that oats are promoted as a healthy food. Beta glucan is thought of reducing blood cholesterol, so a very good health benefit in the oats. And companies like General Mills are interested in how they can increase beta glucan in their grains in the oats. Groats, so that would be the hard grain, percent thins, and then plumps, how those were affected by the fungicide. We also measured fat content and protein content of the grain. So really the take home here is that we didn't see an improvement in beta glucan or any effect of a fungicide across the varieties and across the different timings of this fungicide. The growths too, excuse me, were not affected by the timing of the fungicide. And where we saw differences is where we expected a fungicide is going to improve on the percent plumpness of the seed. It should if you don't apply a fungicide, you're going to have more thins in the grain. So again, but the take home is that the fungicide timing or even the resistance and susceptibility to crown rust did not affect the beta glucan content. The differences here are between varieties and not because of treatments. As far as the fat content and protein content were also not affected, excuse me, just because the fungicide did not influence those qualities. So that's the kind of the summary on the effect of the fungicide on grain quality. Again, we didn't see, this was combined data across the different scenarios where we had light crown rust pressure, moderate, and then severe crown rust pressure. That did not influence the measure of these different grain quality properties. So we have also done some testing looking at a number of non-conventional fungicides, mainly neem products, essential oils, naphtha products, different concentrations. And we've done this for 2 years now. And so here we're showing the percent of the proportion of the disease on the flag leaf, and then on the y-axis we're showing lodging. And then the linear graph is showing the greenness of the plots, or NDVI. And as you can see, the plots that had a lot of disease also ended up lodging, and I'll show you some pictures. And then the plots that didn't have a lot of disease and didn't have lodging, the greenness was pretty high in those plots. So we see that the products containing naphtha seems to be really good at controlling the crown rust as well as controlling lodging. The same plots actually yielded pretty good. So it was just a reverse where you don't have a lot of disease, you have pretty good yield as compared to our standard here, which was Prosaro, again applied at flag leaf. So we do seem to see some good effect of naphtha products that can help us control crown rust, especially that for some of the farmers who are doing organic production of oats. So here's a drone image that showing the NDVI value of these plots. Again, you can see that some of these products are looking pretty good in controlling crown rust, and of course some, especially those from neem product and essential oils, were not as effective. So I have here some pictures again to illustrate that. So you see a plot that was treated with naphtha really looking pretty good. And then the essential oils here are not showing a good control of crown rust. Another picture here, I didn't mention how, you know, crown rust can cause lodging. So this is not because of anything else, but because of crown rust. And the plots that had naphtha stood pretty well and yielded well. Again, the same thing. So you can see here how weeds are starting to take over, again, because of crown rust being so severe. So it's going to cause the plants to lodge if you don't have any protection where a fungicide is not applied. So finally, then I'm going to talk about crown rust in oats that are raised for forage. We've had some questions, you know, people wondering if I plant my oats for forage or a cover crop and then I have crown rust, you know, what should I worry about, you know, if cattle feed on, you know, crown rust infected oats. So the crown rust with forage oats, the problem is going to be just the quality of the feed, but the rust itself is not poisonous to cattle, so it won't be like other fungal pathogens that can cause issues in cattle feeding. But of course, your dry matter content is going to be reduced by the rust. So this was in September last year, you know, almost end of September, and you can see how the crop looked like. So even when you're planting oats for forage, you know, you're not interested in grain, you may still want to consider the variety selection. So at least you can try and keep the disease pressure low, so your forage quality won't be reduced by crown rust. So are there other fungal diseases in oats? And the answer is yes. We see a few of those, but they tend to be more on certain varieties than others. One particular disease that has shown up very strongly, at least last year, was leaf blotch. You can see how it forms these kind of circular lesions on the leaves. And of course, the lower leaves are being killed by this disease. However, if you're applying a fungicide to control crown rust, that should really protect the upper leaves from this disease. And so again, the crown rust remains the main disease of focus, and a fungicide that's applied to control crown rust will also control some of these other fungal diseases. So with that, I want to leave a few minutes for Connie if she's on. I'm not sure that I see her on the panels here, but if not, I will leave some time for questions for anyone out there that has a question. It is my contact information. If anyone has a question on oats or any other crop on diseases, we'll be happy to answer those questions.
Yes, Emmanuel, we have 3 questions. I'll read the first one. Is the effect of fungicide timing crown rust charts available in a publication?
Yes, so we have the crop protection guides where we mention the timing of fungicides. It may not be that we specifically mentioned crown rust, but as I mentioned, the best timing would be flag leaf if the disease is not developing early in the crop. So we do have a crown rust management fact sheet, so that has details on the best timing for fungicide in oats.
Okay, great. The second question is, can you explain why the percent plumps varied with the timing?
So the plumpness of the seed, of course, is the big kernels that are filled well, and of course, if your fungicide is applied a little late, then the plumpness will be affected. You won't have many seeds that are plump, and so the timing of a fungicide, is controlling the disease such that you have more photosynthetes that are going into the seed fill. So if you come in late, after heading, for example, then you're going to have fewer plump seed because those seeds didn't have enough photosynthetes to go into a seed fill, excuse me.
Okay, so Emmanuel, Connie is on, but let's take the third question to get that taken care of. Is
Sure.
rust on forages ever a concern for feed? At times, we also see it on tough grass and even alfalfa.
Right. So as I mentioned, a crown rust on forages is going to be affecting the quality of the feed, but the pathogen itself is not poisonous to cattle. So it may affect feed intake, like because the palatability of the feed is low, but otherwise it's safe to graze a forage that has crown rust. Again, it's not going to be poisonous to the cattle, but of course it does affect, so it's going to affect the quality of the grain. But the pathogen itself is safe. It's not dangerous or poisonous to the cattle or any animals feeding on oats straw.
Okay, John has advised us we can take a little bit of his time. So
Okay.
don't want anybody to get excited here. We have another question that came in. Here it is. Any management to prevent crown rust besides varieties or fungicides would be, an example would be no-till, rotation, or other diversity.
Well, the only other way I see is, if you can, is to eliminate the backthorns. So, because as I mentioned, backthorns are very abundant and they are the source of the disease of the inoculum. So like I mentioned, going west, we don't see a lot of crown rust, and I imagine it's because of the backthorns. And so one way that can help, where we've had our trials here in Volga, we have a bunch of backthorns, and we see a lot of resist pressure coming from those backthorns. These pictures were taken in Volga. So if you can eliminate backthorns around your farm, you may reduce the inoculum, but rust can be blown by wind, so that may not be effective, but it may reduce somewhat the disease pressure. So that's one way, but other ways, like you mentioned, tillage or residue management. Well, this disease, this pathogen, can also survive on several grasses, rye, wild rye, fescue grass, and other grasses are hosts for crown rust as well. So rotation or tillage or any other agronomic practices may not really do anything on crown rust, just because the inoculum is abundant in our environment.
Okay, so that's the end of the questions here. I think it was good to go through those as they came in, because I think they're very great questions. So if we want to bring up Connie's PowerPoint now, she has a few comments to make. Connie is our pathology field specialist, and she is located on the Sioux Falls Regional Center. So as we bring her PowerPoint up here, Emmanuel, did you stop your share?
Yes, I'll do that.
I'm still, okay, there it went. Okay. So Connie can have a few minutes as well here. I believe her PowerPoint is coming up. And Emmanuel, there's a few more questions that have popped in the Q&A there if you would like to address those. I'll be sharing the CCA QR code here shortly after Connie's done.
All right. I just have a couple of slides here to talk about barley yellow dwarf virus, which is a virus we often see here in South Dakota. The nice thing is we typically don't have huge yield limiting issues with this disease, but it is one that we need to be mindful of, because with the virus, it is vectored by aphids, and we'll talk about that in a quick second. But with barley yellow dwarf, we have some initial symptoms that you'll often see out in the fields, kind of yellowish to green streaks that run parallel throughout the leaf of the oat plant. As symptoms of this virus gets more advanced, you'll start to see a yellowing at the tip, and then often the leaves will develop a reddish, purplish type color, and that really depends on the cultivar or variety planted and then time of infection. So we can't go off of that purple red color on its own. because you might just have a yellow discoloration on those leaves. Now, when I talk about it is vectored by aphids, there's a lot of different aphid species out there. There's like over 20 different aphid species that could vector the virus, but here in South Dakota, it's primarily vectored by the bird cherry oat aphid and the English grain aphid. With the aphids, they acquire the barley yellow dwarf virus from feeding on infected plants. Often those infected plants are grassy weeds, volunteer wheat, and other cereal crops. Again, those aphids, they must feed on those infected plants in order to acquire the virus. From there, they're able to transmit that virus when they move and feed on healthy plants. The thing with aphids is they can move and travel long distances in the winged form of the aphids, and they move by flying with those wind currents. Aphids tend to be more active in cool and moist weather. Management, real briefly, for viruses. There's no in-treatment control for viruses in the field. What you'd have to work with is controlling those aphids. Again, we would recommend actually controlling the aphids when they reach the threshold, not just when you see 1 or 2 out in the field. So you want to apply an insecticide when aphids reach threshold. The other method could be eradication of your volunteer wheat, oats, grassy weeds before you start to plant. That way you're kind of eliminating the source of inoculum and eliminating the opportunity for aphids to feed on those infected plants and then transfer to your oats. Now, there's no true resistance out there for cultivars, but there are some differences in susceptibility. So if you did really have a high infestation of aphids really seeming to like one cultivar, you might want to look at rotating that to a different cultivar that following planting season. So that is a real brief look at barley yellow dwarf in oats. And this is just my contact information if you have any questions. But I can go ahead and stop sharing. It was just real brief, wanting to highlight one of the viruses that typically we will get some questions on each year. Again, the nice thing is it hasn't tended to be a massive issue with yield loss.
Okay, great. I think you've stopped your share, correct? I don't see any other questions. I don't think that I'm missing here. This is, yeah, there's the poll. Please provide your answers to our poll. It helps us in our programming efforts. So we'll have that poll up and QR code there as well for the CCA credits. And I'll let that go a little while. And then we'll bring on Dr. John Kleinjan to talk about oat variety selection. I've also posted in the chat how you can request extension publications. I did that a couple of times. And then also how to view recordings of these webinars. So both of those links are in the chat. I can't see the results of the poll, Matt, but I'm assuming you're monitoring that as they're coming in.
Yep, I'm watching it now.
Okay, great. Well, some really good presentations about diseases. I really appreciate Emmanuel's and Connie's comments about that. It's very important. Oats is a crop to reckon with. It's a good crop to try. Okay, I think we've had enough time with the QR code, and we'll bring up Dr. John Kleinjan. He is the extension agronomist that works with crop performance testing, as well as other agronomy issues that he works with, foliar feeding soybeans, sulfur on soybeans, just to name a couple of them. So he's going to talk about choosing a good oat variety today.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Let me try sharing my screen here. Oh, slideshow. Can everybody see that?
Yep, I can see it, John. Good to go.
All right. Okay, well, thanks everybody for this opportunity to talk today. I look forward to the day when we can actually have meetings again, but it is actually a little bit nice to do these virtually too. I think we get maybe a little bit better participation. So yeah, Emmanuel and Connie just said, you guys can see the importance of crown rust resistance in oats, and I'll have a few slides toward the end of my talk looking at some of that stuff. But oats has been really popular, or the popularity has really increased the last few years. I'm on the Foundation Seed Board here at SDSU, and our oat sales at Foundation Seed have really just skyrocketed. I think they're 5 times what they were 10 years ago. So it's a good thing to see. I think the majority of them are still going for forage or cover crop, but there is some grain production as well. When I was a kid growing up in eastern South Dakota, oats was kind of our second crop after corn before soybeans really took over. Maybe in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, soybeans kind of started dominating over oats. But man, I remember raising really good oats when I was a kid. So hopefully we'll get back to some of that. I think it's just good to have that crop in the rotation. So anyway, too much rambling there. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about oat variety selection. Here on the right, we have a picture of the forage oat plots out in Dakota Lakes. You can see the river bluffs there behind. So anyway, I'll talk a couple slides about forage as well as grain. Okay, just to review here quickly, we do oat testing at 11 locations in the state, and here's the website to view the trials. I tell people the easiest way to find them is just to Google SDSU crop performance testing, and that will take you to this homepage. I know that it says, let me turn my laser pointer on here. So I know it says corn hybrid trial results here, but if you scroll down the page further, you'll get to the oat hybrid, or the oat trials, excuse me. And if you look here, you can find the older data, 2017 and prior, and there's also links to 2019, 2018, et cetera, on this page. So that's just a brief introduction there. So if you would scroll down the page here and go to the Oat Hybrid Results, here's kind of a synopsis of what you get here. And I just want to point this out that there's a few different things on here. We have the Oat Variety Trial Results, the regional summaries, and that's where I summarize everything from the different areas of the state. We have Eastern, Central, and Western. Melanie Cafe Tremel, our oat breeder, does an organic oat trial. And I won't talk too much about that today because really the results are fairly similar to what we would see in just the conventional trials, the normal trials, except she looks at things like seeding rate, because in organic production, you want you want more ground cover to control weeds. And I would encourage you to check that out if you're an organic producer. And then here, starting here, just in alphabetical order, I have individual locations from 2020. So the regional summary is just an average of all the locations in an area, but I've tried to put the individual locations out as quickly as I can just to get data up quick. So anyway, moving on. Did a couple things different this year due to COVID. There is a video up where Melanie and I walk through the varieties and kind of explain each one, since we were not allowed to have any field tours. I noticed in these videos, the link to this video is right there with the crop testing results. So it's on this page as well, so you'll be able to find it. I've noticed they always put somebody else there. I think it's because I have a face for radio, but anyway, I encourage you to check that out. We've had some pretty good response with these videos. We did them for spring wheat and winter wheat as well, and I'd like to maybe continue to try to do that. Maybe not every crop every year, but maybe we could alternate or something like that. And then another thing I did, I put these signs up and document boxes at specific locations throughout the state. This is at Dakota Lakes, and here you can see the river bluffs again in the background. And these boxes just kind of walk through the varieties the same way we would do in the video, or if we were having a field tour. So if you want to go look at varieties at a certain location, you can go pull a handout out and walk through them yourselves. They're staked so you can see what is what. While I think of it, I would like to thank General Mills. I think Emmanuel gave a shout out to them too in his talk, but General Mills has been a good partner in funding a lot of oat research. And actually they made it possible to do this peer location. I think we added it 3 years ago. So moving on. Okay, this is a map of the state with the yields kind of overlaying where each testing location is. So this is 2020. You can see the strongest yields. We had a very good crop at Dakota Lakes. Miller was fairly good too. Typically you see the strongest yields kind of in the north. It just doesn't get as hot up there, and we had just excellent growing conditions in Brown County this year. That might be some of the highest yields I've seen in that location. Typically Selby is a very good location. We just didn't have the crop there that we have had before, but I've seen oats push 200 bushels in Selby. The South Shore is typically pretty strong. I'd say it was a little down there this year. We had some issues in the plots. I don't know if we had a little bit of herbicide carryover or what, but I was a little disappointed in that. And then Brookings here, I have an asterisk there. We do 2 trials in Brookings. One is fungicide treated and one is not, so we can compare varieties, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of my talk. And then out west we have Wall ran out of water. It was just kind of dry there all year. Draper, and then Winter. So a good crop in winter. And then down at Southeast Farm, I mean, a decent crop, 100 bushel oats, but crown rust kind of got to us there. So crown rust is typically going to affect the eastern tier of the state. Okay, this is a little bit blurry, I guess, when I blow it all the way up. But so if you go into that regional summary file, the first table is a table showing agronomic characteristics, testing and origin, grain quality, and disease rating. So let's just look at this quickly. Over here on the left, we have the list of the varieties. So let's just talk about Dion here. Dion was released from Minnesota in 2013. Relative heading, Dion's one of the later varieties, later maturing. The check is saddle, and I have footnotes on these tables to tell you which day of the year saddle was heading, but I didn't include those just for, it would have made things too hard to see. So Dion is 7 days later than saddle. It is 6 inches taller than saddle. Saddle is an early short variety. So you can just see the differences here. Well, one thing you might want to note, look how tall Goliath is compared to everything else. Goliath is always an easy one to pick out because of its height. Okay, lodging scores. And look at that, I got a typo. That should be 2020 lodging score. But anyway, this is something you really want to pay attention to in oats. Some of the newer varieties that Melanie has out, Saddle and Warrior, for instance, pretty good lodging scores. Some of the older ones like Hayden, 3.3, Goliath, 3.6. So that's an important thing to look for if you're choosing a variety. Just watch out for the lodging potential, especially if you have high fertility soils. You might want to pick something like Saddle or Warrior that's going to stand up a little bit better. Grain color, most of the oats are white. There's Dion is really the yellow one that would be sold in this area. There's a couple from Wisconsin that are yellow, but they just don't seem to perform very well in South Dakota. I wouldn't recommend planting them. But everything else is typically white. Just make sure if you're going to grow an oat and you have an end user in mind that yellow oats don't matter. I don't think it used to be an issue, but I don't really think it is anymore. And then relative test weight. So this is relative to the trial average and relative protein. So you can see here, CS Camden is 3.6 bushels below the trial average of test weight. Camden has very low test weight. I think one of the better ones is going to be Rushmore, Melanie's newest one, which is 1.6 bushels, pounds per bushel, above the trial average. And then you can look at protein here too. Protein's probably not as an important consideration in oats as in spring wheat or winter wheat, but test weight's a very important one. And then we have disease ratings over here on the right. I've been trying to transition into a number scale because I feel it's more intuitive for producers and to read. So the number scales would range from 1 to 9, 1 being the most resistant to crown rust and 9 being the most susceptible. Same with Barley Yellow Dwarf. And smut and stem rust are still in the, I guess, susceptible resistant rating category. We just haven't had the opportunity to rate those diseases. Okay. We have a table with nutrition and milling characteristics. This is probably not important to a lot of producers, but the end users really like this. So we include this, you know, with percent plumps, mids, thins, 1,000 kernel rate, growth percentage, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are trying to do a specific end user contract for oats, this is going to be useful information for you. Okay, I'm just going to briefly go through each of the regions. So Eastern South Dakota, you can see how I arranged this here. We have the yields in 2018, 2019, and then in 2020, I have yield and test weight. And then I have a 2-year yield and test weight, and then a 3-year. So I sort by the 3-year yield, and then by 2-year. The nice thing about oats is we've seen most of these for 3 years, so it's a good comparison. But you can see in the East which ones kind of rise to the top. Dion, Rushmore, Warrior, Camden, Saddle. I've seen these enough to know that, yeah, these are strong varieties. One thing to point out is the LSD down here of 12.5. That means if we did this trial many times, anything within 12.5 bushels of this plot winner is going to be statistically have the same chance to win. Okay, so statistically these are all the same. I highlight the top third instead of the LSD group because I think top third is a little more consistent and maybe just a little bit more intuitive. And then look at the CVs, especially for yield. That'll tell you how reliable the data is. A CV under 10 is really good. They say less than 15 is acceptable. I like to see it under 10. Here we have, you know, CVs of 5, 6, 7. So very good data. Let's look at Central South Dakota. You can see a little bit of similarity to which ones are towards the top. Again, Hayden rises a little more to the top there, and that's simply because in the East, Hayden is susceptible to crown rust, right? So we don't see it as much in Central South Dakota. And so if you're going to grow Hayden in Eastern South Dakota, you want to use a fungicide for sure. And the CVs are also good here. In fact, they're a little bit lower in the central part of the state. And the reason for that is we just don't have crown rust, which induces a lot of yield variability. Okay, let's look at Western South Dakota. Western South Dakota is slightly different. Some of the older varieties like Goliath and Hayden will rise to the top, again, because of the lack of crown rust. Goliath, remember I said Goliath is a big lodger. Well, out in the West, we typically don't have enough growth, so it doesn't lodge, so it tends to yield a little bit more out there. CVs are kind of high here, just because I think we have a lot of drought pressure in the Western South Dakota relative to Eastern, and the weed control in some of these plots has been a little bit suspect as well. And that will introduce some variability, but still under 15, so we would call that good data. Okay, so to summarize here, the top picks, in my opinion, oats for grain production, the big 5. Rushmore is the newest release from South Dakota. Just a solid grain producer, good test weight, stands up fairly well. Maybe doesn't have quite the lodging resistance that Warrior does, but just a good solid pick throughout the whole state. Warrior is another good one. Warriors, we named that one Warrior because it was such a high yielder. Melanie wanted to call it the Yield Warrior, but I would not recommend this one in Western South Dakota. So Central and Eastern South Dakota, Warrior is a good choice, but not in the West. Dion, Dion's an older one, 8 years old from Minnesota, but it still is probably the, I don't know if I would say the standard. It was one of the first locally adapted varieties that were resistant to crown rust. Still a solid yielder. You guys saw that in the slides we just went through. I would not be afraid to plant Dion at all. And Hayden, Hayden has excellent yield potential, right up there with Rushmore and Warrior, maybe a few bushels less, but you got to use a fungicide with Hayden. It's just susceptible to crown rust in the eastern part of the state. If you're in the central and west, I wouldn't worry about it so much, but a good choice. And Camden, I hesitate to recommend this one, but I really have to because it's just such a high yielder. Camden is from Meridian Seed. Just be aware that it's very hard to get this one to have a good test weight. So it's low test weight. Some end users are pretty concerned about that. So just be aware. So those are the ones that I've seen a 3-year average on that I would recommend for grain production. Promising, we saw MN Pearl from Minnesota for the first time last year. That one looked very good. I don't know, I haven't seen the pedigree to see if it's related to Dion, but it does have resistance to crown rust. It is a white oat, and it yielded right up at the top with Rushmore and anything else throughout the state last year. So we'll keep our eye on this one. Wouldn't be hesitant to plant it. I'd like to see it for more than 1 year, but it did really well in 2020. Okay, oats for forage. Melanie does a forage trial, the oat breeder, at 4 locations, and she's done it in 2 years now, 2019 and 2020. And actually that publication will be coming up online here probably this week. We just had the final draft submitted and approved. So that'll be coming up to the website right along with the grain trials and the organic oat trial. So you'll be able to find that. So the big 5 for forage. Rushmore, so this is average over all 4 locations over 2 years, 4.9 tons per acre. And this is tons of dry matter. MN Pearl, Hayden, Dion, and Goliath. And you know, they're all pretty close to each other, but these are the ones that would be recommended for forage production. Again, be a little cautious with Goliath because of the lodging potential, and Hayden, you want to use a fungicide on Hayden in the eastern part of the state. Okay. New varieties. I'm not going to talk about these too much. I just wanted to kind of point these out. We'll go through this quickly. I'm running through my time quicker than I thought here. But 150012, we would have released that last fall. Excellent yielder again, moderately resistant to crown rust. We just didn't have enough bushels to release it. So if it hangs together, we should release it this coming fall. Another high yielding option for South Dakota producers. And then this one, I probably shouldn't even talk about it because it's 3 years away. And but I saw it for the first time last year. Did very well, especially in the eastern part of the state. So just wanted to show you guys that Melanie's got a couple of good things in the pipeline. She's got a great program going here, and look forward to some new ones coming out soon. Okay, my last few slides here. As I said, in Brookings, we do a fungicide versus no fungicide trial where all the varieties are treated with and without fungicide. You'll recognize this picture from the last talk. I got it from Emmanuel, but crown rust really, look at how it just devastated this horsepower plot, and horsepower is very susceptible. But anyway, I don't probably need to hammer on that anymore, but crown rust is absolutely devastating. Okay, I apologize for this picture. This is Volga oat plots in 2020, and I should have taken a different angle here because it's hard to see, but the combine is going through on one of the last couple passes of the fungicide treated plots. So over here on the left, we had all the fungicide treated, and then once you get to about here to the right, these are the non-treated, and look how much different the lodging is. I know it doesn't show up so well in the picture, but where we treated with fungicide, everything is standing up very well. Where we did not treat, you can see what crown rust does. Even if it doesn't affect the yield a lot, well, it does affect the yield a lot, but it really makes the plant weaker and increases your lodging. So the last slide here, I know this one's a little busy, but I'm going to go through this and explain it. So on the left here, the left half of this, we have the varieties with a crown rust rating of 6 or less, which would be considered moderately resistant to resistant. You can see Warrior had the most resistance in 2020. And then what I have here is fungicide, no fungicide, and a response in bushels per acre. And then here on the right, we have a crown rust rating of 7 and higher, which would be considered moderately susceptible to susceptible. And you can see that the varieties here, Shelby 27 and Hayden Goliath, are the most susceptible things we have left in the trials since we got rid of horsepower. So the funny thing is, the take home here, and this surprised us all, is we were still getting a mean response of 17 bushels an acre in varieties that are considered to be resistant to crown rust. Not quite as high of an average response as the varieties that are susceptible, 36 bushels an acre. I mean, look at some of these, 50 bushels an acre response to fungicide on these really susceptible varieties. But even Dion over here and Pearl which we would consider to be resistant, we were getting, roughly a 30 bushel response. Melanie's newer ones, I mean, Rushmore, I consider that one to be very resistant. We got a 20 bushel response to fungicide. So the question is the crown rust changing? Is our resistance breaking down, or there is a chance there was other fungal pathogens out there that the fungicide is controlling? And Emmanuel would be a better one to talk about that. But we are going to replicate this again next year, and we're going to try to do it in 3 locations. In fact, we're going to do Northeast Farm and South Shore, Volga, and then Beersford. So we typically don't have a lot of pressure in Northeast Farm. That's kind of year to year, but Volga and Beersford, it seems like we get it every year. So we're going to try to do this for a couple of years and see if we get this kind of response again on the resistant varieties, and do some disease monitoring and just to kind of keep an eye on things. That is the end of my talk. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer. I'm going to stop sharing now so they can put the QR code up.
Great. Thank you, John. Some really great information there. Those varieties are really changing. I remember when horsepower was considered resistant, the year it lost it was really amazing. So good information from everybody today. Let's see, I always lose my chat when why does it do that? John, maybe you could look at the chat there and see if you have any questions coming in. I can see the Q&A. I don't have any in that right now.
I don't see any questions.
Okay, great. We love questions. So it's great we have them covered, but please ask.
Ruth says Q&A. I don't see any open questions.
I don't either. There was one in the Q&A about naphtha fungicide, and I think Emmanuel took care of that by typing in. If he wanted to talk about that a little bit now, we sure could. Or why don't we wait until the open discussion too here?